Dear listeners, we're back with a new story. Get ready for cheating, revenge, and wild relationship drama. It started off like any other Sunday morning. Tom had woken up early, his body accustomed to the rhythm of routine. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the kitchen as he poured himself a cup of coffee. He could hear Linda moving about upstairs, getting ready to join him, as she always did. By the time she walked into the kitchen, Tom had already set out her favorite mug, a habit he'd formed over their 32 years of marriage. He smiled as she sat across from him, the same seat she'd occupied for countless mornings. There was something different about her today, though, an unspoken tension that hung in the air. Her eyes, usually so vibrant, seemed clouded with uncertainty. Tom took a sip of his coffee, studying her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "You've been quiet all morning." Linda didn't respond immediately. She just stared into her coffee, fingers trembling slightly as they traced the rim of her mug. Finally, she looked up, meeting his gaze with an intensity that made Tom's heart skip a beat. "Tom, there's something I need to talk to you about," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom frowned, setting his cup down. "What is it?" "You're scaring me, Linda." She took a deep breath, as if bracing herself for the impact of her own words. I've been feeling trapped," she said, each word a jagged shard of glass. "I feel like there's so much of life I haven't experienced, and I want to explore that. I think I want to start dating other people." Tom blinked, certain he'd misheard. He let out a nervous chuckle. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Because if it is, it's not funny." "I'm not joking," Linda said, her voice steady now, her eyes locked on his. "I've thought about this for a long time. I feel like I've missed out on something I need to understand about myself." "Missed out?" Tom repeated, disbelief turning to anger. "What about everything we've built together? The years we've shared, the love, the sacrifices? Are you really saying that means nothing to you?" "Of course, it means something," Linda snapped, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "But I can't ignore this part of me anymore. I need to do this for myself." Tom stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. "And what about me? What am I supposed to do while you're out exploring?" His voice was louder now, edged with hurt and anger. "Just sit here and wait for you to come back like some kind of fool?" Linda looked down, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm not asking you to wait. I'm asking you to understand." "Understand?" Tom laughed bitterly. "You've already made up your mind, haven't you? This isn't a conversation, it's a declaration." He took a step back, running a hand through his hair as he tried to process the reality of what she was saying. "Is there someone else?" he asked, his voice breaking, even though he feared the answer. There was a moment of silence before Linda nodded, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "His name is David. We've been seeing each other for a few weeks now." Tom felt as if the floor had crumbled beneath him, as if everything he'd known, everything he'd trusted, had shattered in an instant. "How could you do this to us?" he whispered, pain etched into every word. "How could you throw away everything we've built together for some fling?" "It's not just a fling," Linda protested, her voice rising. "It's more than that. And I need to find out what it means." Tom stood there, staring at the woman he thought he knew, feeling like a stranger in his own life. "I thought we were forever," he murmured, his voice trembling. "I thought you were my forever." "Maybe that's the problem," Linda said, wiping her tears away. "Maybe we've been so focused on being forever that we forgot to be ourselves." "Is that what you're going to tell yourself?" Tom shot back, bitterness spilling over. "That this is about finding yourself while you tear apart everything we've built?" Linda looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "Well, congratulations," Tom said, his voice cracking. "You did." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, two people who'd once been inseparable now standing on opposite sides of an unbridgeable chasm. Tom's mind raced with questions, accusations, and disbelief, but he couldn't find the words to express the storm of emotions raging inside him. "Is this it, then?" he asked finally, his voice hollow. "Are you just going to walk away?" "I don't want to walk away," Linda replied. "I want to find a way for us to stay in each other's lives, somehow." Tom shook his head, his eyes burning with unshed tears. "You don't get to decide that," he said, his voice firm. "You've already made your choice. Now, I have to make mine." Linda reached out, as if to touch him, but Tom stepped back, keeping the distance between them. He couldn't bear to feel her touch, not now, not when everything he thought he knew about their life had been turned to ash. "Tom," she began, but he cut her off. "Don't," he said, his voice ragged. "Just, don't." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Linda standing there alone, clutching the mug he'd set out for her, the warmth already fading. The days that followed Linda's revelation felt like a blur for Tom. He went through the motions of life, work, chores, dinner, but it all felt hollow. The world outside continued its relentless pace, but inside him, time seemed frozen, locked in the moment he learned that the woman he loved had chosen to leave him behind. At first, Tom tried to keep busy. He threw himself into work, spending late nights at the office. His colleagues noticed his distraction, but he brushed off their concerns. "Just a lot on my plate," he'd say with a forced smile. But inside, he was crumbling. One evening, he found himself alone in their empty house, the silence echoing painfully. He poured a glass of whiskey, hoping to drown out the memories of laughter, shared meals, and quiet moments that now felt like cruel reminders of what he had lost. The amber liquid burned as it slid down his throat, and for a fleeting moment, it dulled the edge of his pain. As he sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television, the weight of his thoughts grew heavier. The news anchor droned on, but Tom's mind was elsewhere, back to Linda, back to David. He imagined their evenings together, the intimacy they shared, and a rage like he'd never known boiled up inside him. "What the hell is wrong with her?" he muttered, slamming his glass down on the coffee table. "How could she do this? To me? To us?" The silence of the house answered him, mocking his despair. In his anger, he picked up his phone and scrolled through social media, catching glimpses of friends and acquaintances who seemed blissfully unaware of his turmoil. He saw photos of happy couples, families enjoying life, and a familiar wave of bitterness washed over him. Grabbing the whiskey bottle, he poured another glass, determined to forget. A few days later, at work, Tom's frustration erupted in a confrontation with his boss, Mark. The two had always gotten along well, but today, Tom was on edge. "Tom, is everything okay?" Mark asked, concern etched on his face as he reviewed a report. "Yeah, just peachy," Tom snapped, his voice laced with sarcasm. "I'm just really enjoying life right now, you know." Mark frowned. "This isn't like you. You've been off your game for weeks. What's going on?" Tom slammed his hand on the desk, causing papers to scatter. "What's going on?" "My wife decides she wants to date someone else." "How do you think I feel?" Mark's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Have you thought about talking to someone? A counselor, maybe, talk it out." Tom scoffed. "What good would that do? I just need to get through the day without losing my mind." "Look, I'm here if you need to talk," Mark offered, but Tom waved him off, anger boiling beneath the surface. "Yeah, I'll keep that in mind," he muttered, leaving the office and heading to the nearest bar. That night, Tom found himself sitting alone at a dimly lit bar, surrounded by laughter and music. It felt like a different world, one where his pain didn't exist. He ordered drink after drink, his thoughts spiraling deeper into darkness with each swallow. He glanced around, observing couples and groups of friends enjoying their lives. "Look at them," he muttered to himself, bitterness lacing his words. "So happy. So normal. And here I am, a broken man." Suddenly, his phone buzzed, startling him. It was a text from Linda. "Can we talk? I miss you." Tom stared at the screen, a mix of anger and longing surging through him. "Miss me?" he scoffed, shaking his head as he downed another drink. "You can't just waltz back into my life whenever it suits you." He typed a quick reply, "I don't think there's anything left to say." He set his phone down, feeling the weight of his decision. Yet, the nagging feeling of regret still tugged at him. Just then, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, mind if I join you?" a woman asked, sliding onto the stool beside him. She had long brown hair and a friendly smile that seemed to cut through the fog of his misery. "Sure, why not?" Tom replied, his voice flat. "Not like I'm doing anything important. I'm Sarah," she introduced herself, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "You look like you could use a drink." "More like I could use a miracle," Tom muttered, swirling the ice in his glass. "What's got you down?" Sarah asked, genuine concern in her voice. Tom hesitated but felt a strange urge to unload. "My wife left me. She's dating someone else now." "Wow, I'm so sorry," Sarah said, her expression shifting to empathy. "That must be really tough." "It is," Tom admitted, surprised at his own honesty. "It feels like my whole world just fell apart." "Have you thought about doing something to get your mind off things?" Sarah suggested, her tone brightening. "Like a hobby or something?" "I don't know," he replied, forcing a laugh. "What do you do when your whole life turns into a dumpster fire?" "Start small," she encouraged. "Maybe pick up a new hobby or take a class. You'd be surprised how much a little distraction can help." Tom nodded slowly, considering her words. "Maybe you're right. But right now, I just want to forget." "Then let's drink to forgetting." Sarah raised her glass, and Tom clinked his against hers, a flicker of camaraderie igniting in the dark void of his despair. But as the night wore on and the whiskey blurred the edges of his pain, Tom found himself drifting further away from the man he used to be. He realized he was on a dangerous path, one that could lead him to actions he couldn't take back. Yet the thought of revenge against Linda's new lover began to seep into his mind like a dark shadow. As he made his way home that night, Tom wrestled with a growing desire for retribution. He thought about confronting Linda, confronting David. Would that somehow make him feel better? Or would it only serve to further plunge him into chaos? Standing in front of his house, he felt a rush of conflicting emotions, anger, heartbreak, a desperate need for closure. But instead of acting on those destructive impulses, he took a deep breath and made a choice. "I won't go down that road," he murmured to himself. "I refuse to let her choices dictate my actions." With newfound determination, he resolved to reclaim control over his life. The thoughts of revenge faded, replaced by a singular focus. He would move forward. He would take charge of his destiny, even if it meant redefining everything he thought he knew about love and relationships. And as he stepped inside, the weight of his pain still heavy, he understood that the journey ahead would not be easy, but it was a journey he had to undertake. The weeks turned into months, and Tom's decision to reclaim his life slowly transformed him. After countless nights of restless sleep, he finally found a semblance of clarity amid the chaos. The anger that had consumed him began to wane, replaced by an insatiable desire for independence. He spent his evenings searching for an apartment, carefully scrolling through listings on his phone, scrutinizing each one for potential. The thought of leaving their shared home felt both liberating and terrifying. Every time he drove past the familiar streets of their neighborhood, nostalgia tugged at him, but he reminded himself of Linda's choices. One evening, he finally settled on a cozy apartment downtown, a stark contrast to the sprawling family home he'd known for years. It had an open layout, modern appliances, and a small balcony that overlooked the city. He imagined himself sitting there with a drink, embracing the newfound freedom he was determined to cultivate. The day of the move arrived, and as Tom packed the last of his belongings, he felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He stood in the living room, the emptiness echoing the void in his heart. It was a bittersweet farewell to a life he had cherished but now felt like a cage. "Tom, are you sure about this?" Linda's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had come by, presumably to help, but her presence only stirred up the tension between them. "Sure about what?" he replied curtly, avoiding eye contact as he shoved a box into the back of his car. "About moving on with my life." Linda took a step closer, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration. "I just thought, maybe we could talk about this. Figure things out." Tom turned to face her, his resolve hardening. "What's there to figure out, Linda? You made your choice. You wanted freedom, I'm giving it to you." She looked hurt, and for a moment, Tom felt a pang of guilt. "I didn't want it to end this way," she whispered. "I just wanted to explore, not to lose you. Yet here we are," he shot back, his voice rising. "You chose to date someone else. You can't just turn that off when it's convenient for you." Linda opened her mouth to respond, but Tom cut her off, needing to establish boundaries. "I can't do this right now," he said, turning back to his car. "I need to focus on myself." "I thought we could still be friends," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I miss you." Tom paused, the weight of her words hanging in the air. "What we had is gone, Linda. I can't just pretend everything's fine because you miss me." He climbed into the car and shut the door, leaving Linda standing there, tears welling in her eyes. As he pulled away from the house for the last time, he felt a mixture of relief and sorrow wash over him. Settling into the new apartment was a fresh start, albeit a daunting one. He painted the walls a soothing shade of blue, arranged the furniture to create a comfortable space, and even bought a few plants to breathe life into the rooms. He set up a small workspace where he could focus on his job and reconnect with the hobbies he had neglected over the years. One evening, he found himself scrolling through social media again. His friends were posting pictures from recent outings, laughing and enjoying their lives. A sense of isolation crept in, but he pushed it away, reminding himself that this was a part of the healing process. "Hey, Tom," a voice called out from the hallway, breaking his reverie. It was his neighbor, a young woman named Mia who had moved in a few weeks earlier. She had a bright smile and a friendly demeanor that was hard to resist. "Hey, Mia," Tom replied, waving her in. "What's up? I just wanted to invite you to a small get-together at my place tonight," she said, glancing around his apartment. "I'm making some snacks, and I thought it'd be nice to get to know each other." Tom hesitated, feeling a flicker of anxiety at the thought of socializing. "I don't know. I'm not really in the mood for a party." "Come on. It'll be fun, and you might meet some cool people," Mia encouraged, her enthusiasm infectious. "You can't hide out in here forever." Tom chuckled, the corners of his mouth lifting despite his reservations. "All right, you win. I'll come by for a bit." Later that evening, Tom found himself standing in the cozy living room of Mia's apartment, surrounded by a small group of neighbors. The atmosphere was lively, laughter filling the air as people shared stories and jokes. Tom clutched a drink in his hand, still adjusting to the newness of it all. "Hey, Tom," Mia called out, pulling him into the circle. "Tell us something interesting about yourself." Well. I used to play the guitar," he said, glancing down at his drink. "Not sure I still remember how, though." "Really?" a man named Jake chimed in. "You should play something. We'd love to hear it." Tom shook his head, a mix of shyness and reluctance. "I haven't played in years. It's probably best to leave the music to the professionals." "Come on, don't be shy. Let's hear it," Mia encouraged, her smile wide and genuine. Taking a deep breath, Tom felt a flicker of determination. Maybe this was what he needed, a chance to connect with new people and rediscover parts of himself he had buried. "All right, I'll give it a shot." He walked to the corner of the room where his guitar was propped against the wall, dusting it off and tuning the strings. As he strummed the first few notes, a sense of calm washed over him. The familiar sound of music felt comforting, like an old friend returning after a long absence. With every chord, the room quieted, and he poured his heart into the song. It was a simple melody, but it felt cathartic, a release of the pain and heartache he had been carrying. As he finished, the room erupted in applause, and he looked up to see smiles and encouragement all around him. That was amazing, Tom. Mia exclaimed, her eyes shining. You should play more often. Tom felt a warmth spread through him, the first spark of joy he'd experienced in a long time. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it, he said, a smile breaking across his face. The weeks that followed were filled with small victories, new friendships formed, new experiences embraced. Tom began to explore the city, joining a local gym and attending events at nearby cafes. He learned to cook simple meals and even tried his hand at painting, rediscovering a passion he had set aside for far too long. And through it all, Linda's presence lingered like a ghost in the back of his mind. But instead of drowning in memories, he found himself thinking of her less and less. He was building a new life, one that was his own, free from the constraints of the past. One evening, as he was walking home from a community event, he bumped into Linda on the street. She looked surprised, her eyes widening as they locked gazes. Tom, she said softly, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. I didn't expect to see you here. Yeah, just getting to know the neighborhood, he replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. I've been thinking about you, Linda admitted, taking a step closer. About everything. Tom held his ground, feeling the rush of emotions swirl inside him. I've been thinking too, he said, his voice steady. And I'm learning to live without you. Her face fell, the reality of his words hitting her hard. I miss you, Tom. I really do. I miss the idea of us, he replied, the truth cutting sharper than he intended. But I can't go back to the way things were. I'm finally finding my footing. Linda looked down, the weight of regret evident in her posture. I understand, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I just wish things were different. Me too, Tom said, his heart heavy. But they're not. And I have to keep moving forward. He stepped back, the distance between them feeling like a chasm. As he walked away, he felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. He was starting anew, and while the memories of Linda would always linger, he was finally learning to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. Months passed since Tom had fully embraced his new life. His apartment felt like a sanctuary, filled with the sounds of music, the aroma of home-cooked meals, and the laughter of friends who had quickly become family. Yet, despite the newfound joy, a shadow loomed over him, one he couldn't quite shake off. Tom found himself increasingly aware of the void left by Linda. Though he had resolved to move on, moments would creep in, an old song on the radio, a familiar place he'd pass by, that would pull him back into a whirlpool of memories. Each time, he'd remind himself of the decision he'd made, yet the regret lingered like an echo. One evening, as he returned from a gathering with friends, he felt the familiar ache of loneliness. He sat on his balcony, watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky. The crisp air felt refreshing, yet there was a longing in his chest that he couldn't ignore. Hey, stranger, a voice called from below. It was Mia, holding a half-empty bottle of wine and waving up at him. Want to join me for a nightcap? Tom hesitated, but the invitation broke the spell of solitude that wrapped around him. Sure, give me a minute. He grabbed a couple of glasses and made his way down to her apartment, where she had set up a cozy spot on her balcony. The atmosphere was relaxed, the sounds of laughter and chatter from nearby balconies creating a vibrant backdrop. Mia poured them both a glass, her eyes sparkling. So, how's the new life treating you? Still painting and playing guitar? Tom smiled, warmth spreading through him. Yeah, I've actually joined a local band. We play at open mic nights around the city. Wow, that's awesome. I'd love to see you perform, she said, raising her glass in a toast. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, Tom echoed, clinking his glass against hers. As they drank and chatted, he felt a sense of ease that had been hard to find in recent months. After a few rounds, Mia's demeanor shifted. So, have you heard from Linda? She asked gently, gauging his reaction. Tom's heart sank slightly at the mention of her name. Not really. A few texts here and there, but I've been trying to keep my distance. Is that helping? She probed, concern evident in her voice. It's complicated, Tom admitted, leaning back against the railing. Part of me wants to move on completely, but sometimes I feel this regret. Like I didn't fight hard enough for us. Mia looked at him thoughtfully. You know, it's normal to feel that way. Relationships are complex. But you have to remember why you chose to leave. Yeah, I know, Tom said, staring into his glass. But there are moments I catch myself wondering if I could have done something differently. Maybe I could have communicated better, or been more open about my feelings. Or maybe it was just time for both of you to grow apart, Mia suggested gently. Sometimes, people just drift, and it doesn't mean it was a failure. Tom nodded, appreciating her perspective. I guess I just didn't expect to feel so lost. I thought moving out would clear my head, but it's like I'm constantly reminded of what I've lost. Mia reached out, placing a comforting hand on his arm. You're not alone in this, you know. I've been through my own share of heartbreak, and I get how hard it is to let go. Tom looked into her eyes, seeing the understanding there. Thanks, Mia. It really helps to talk about it. As the night wore on, they shared stories of their pasts, laughter mingling with vulnerability. Tom felt a sense of camaraderie growing between them, a bond forged through shared experiences and the warmth of connection. Yet, as he enjoyed the moment, a voice in his head reminded him of Linda, of the love they had built and ultimately lost. The next day, Tom found himself at a local coffee shop, lost in thought as he stirred his drink. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the pages of a book he had brought along. But his mind wandered, consumed by memories of Linda. He picked up his phone and scrolled through their old texts, a wave of nostalgia crashing over him. Then, he hesitated, feeling a tug of uncertainty. Did he really want to revisit those moments? He locked his phone and took a deep breath, trying to focus on the present. Tom, a familiar voice called, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Linda, walking in with a hesitant smile. Hey, he said, surprised but trying to keep his composure. What are you doing here? I was just grabbing some coffee. I didn't expect to see you, she replied, her expression shifting from cautious to hopeful. Do you mind if I join you? Tom hesitated, then nodded. Sure, have a seat. As they settled in, the tension between them was palpable. Tom could see the changes in her hair was longer, and there was a lightness in her demeanor that felt both comforting and alien. I've been meaning to reach out, Linda began, her voice soft. I wanted to talk about us. Tom braced himself, unsure of where the conversation would lead. What is there to say, Linda? You made your choice. I know, and I regret it, she said, her eyes pleading. I thought I wanted something different, but I've realized that I miss what we had. I miss you. Tom felt a whirlwind of emotions at her confession. You don't get to just decide that now, Linda. You left me for someone else. You chose to explore. I was left to pick up the pieces. I know, she said, her voice trembling. And I've realized how much I took for granted. I was selfish. Selfish doesn't even begin to cover it, Tom retorted, anger bubbling beneath the surface. You shattered everything we built together. Linda looked down, shame washing over her face. I'm sorry, Tom. I really am. I thought I needed space to find myself, but all I found was regret. Regret? Tom echoed, feeling his heart race. Is that all this is to you? You just want to come back because you're unhappy with your choices? No, she protested, her eyes widening. I want to come back because I've realized how much you mean to me. I've missed you every day since we separated. Tom sighed heavily, the weight of her words pulling him in conflicting directions. It's not that simple, Linda. You can't just expect everything to go back to normal after what happened. I know, she said, her voice steadying. But I'm willing to try. I want to make it right. I want to rebuild what we had, if you'll let me. He looked at her, the hurt still fresh in his mind. Rebuilding doesn't happen overnight. Trust takes time, and you shattered mine. I understand that, she replied earnestly. But I'm here, willing to put in the work. I just hope you can find it in your heart to give us another chance. Tom felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to tremble. There was a part of him that still loved her, still cherished the memories they had created together. But there was also the part that had grown strong, that had learned to stand on his own 2 feet. I need time to think, he finally said, his voice low. I can't promise anything. Linda nodded, her expression a mix of hope and disappointment. I'll give you space. Just know that I'm here, and I want to make it right. As she stood to leave, Tom felt a tug in his chest, a bittersweet ache that lingered long after she had walked away. He watched her go, the weight of their history pressing down on him. Returning to his coffee, he stared out the window, grappling with the reality of their situation. Regret mingled with the newfound sense of self he had fought so hard to build. He realized that the journey ahead would require more than just time, it would demand reflection, understanding, and a willingness to confront the shadows of their past. In that moment, he knew he stood at a crossroads. Whatever path he chose, it would shape not only his future but the very essence of who he was becoming.